Welcome back to another episode of 40 Facts About the 40K Universe. I am your host, Gersh1, and today we're going to be talking about Spacemarine battles. If you're new to the channel, subscribe. We post Warhammer 40K lore videos every single day. If you have any suggestions, please comment down below. But with that said, let's get into 40 facts on Spacemarine battles. The Necron Lord, Nemesor Non-Drak, gave the Imperial defenders of Ut Prime 1 solar month to withdraw, as was required by ancient Necron codes of battle. Yet, when the deadline had passed, the foolish humans had not taken advantage of this most generous offer. While the Necron fleet held itself in orbit around Ut Prime's desert moon, 4 regiments of the Imperial Guard's Catachan jungle fighters and 3 companies of Imperial 5th Space Marines had come to reinforce the contested world. So when the Necron Lord finally launched his assault, he did so against a planet with formidable defenders. However, when his courtiers argued against protracting the war to its completion, the Nemesor merely issued a grating laugh. In the beginning of the war, the Necron Lord ignored Ut Prime's outlying cities, focusing his assault on Fort Ann, the planetary capital. His first attack wave was a dozen squadrons of Doomscythe fighter craft. They swarmed over Fort Ann's fortification, death rays raising great furrows of twisted metal and stone as they plowed through bastions, ferrocrete walls, and luckless human defenders therein. To their credit, the humans put up a spiritual resistance. Hydra-flanked tanks and defense lasers scoured the skies, driving off or blasting apart many of the swarming Necron aircraft. Yet each time a Doomscythe was destroyed, another immediately peeled off from the main group to exact vengeance. Soon, Fort Ann was stripped of aerial defenses, and the landing began. Transport craft followed in the wake of the first attack. Night sights flew low over the wreckage of crashed Necron flyers and Imperial bastions. Small arms fires scattered across the Night Sight's armored hull, as their flickering teleportation invasion beams delivered the Necron's assault troops into the heart of the human defenses. Phalanx upon phalanx of immortals and Necron warriors stalked through the fresh ruins, Gauss weapons blazing in unnaturally piercing volleys as they drove the Catachans back. Here and there, an officer sparked orders held the guardsmen in line, but where those commanders fell, the Imperial line went into full retreat. It was as the attackers' lines reached the planetary governor's citadel that the Imperial Fist finally made their presence known. Thunderhawk gunships screamed through the skies, shredding the oncoming Necron warriors with heavy bolter fire and blasting immortal limb from limb with missile strikes. As the gunships touched down amongst the rubble to disgorge Space Marines into the fray, the Necrons shifted to the defense protocol and awaited reinforcement. Alas for the Imperial Fists, from a vantage point in orbit, the Lord had marked the approach of the Thunderhawks long before they had made their presence known. Thus, even as the roar of boulder fire echoed through Fort Ann's ruins, a shadow fell over the battlefield as the massive Negron megalith descended. The megalith was no ordinary war engine, but a vast floating fortress. Green fire lanced out from its flanks, blasting Thunderhawks from the air or crippling them to the ground. As the shadow grew larger, chunks of the megalith's understructure broke away, the blocks falling lazily to the ground. They were no mere wreckages, but monoliths detaching from the mothership's hull. As each touched down, it added firepower to the barrage assailing the Imperial Fists. The Space Marines must have known that they were doomed, but duty and stubborn tenacity made them redouble their efforts. Las cannon and multi-melt of fire flickered through the ruins, the beams converging to pierce the monolith's necrodermis hulls. Assault squads threw themselves at the Necron phalanxes, chainsword teeth screaming as they ripped through living metal bodies. However, the megalith was now close enough to the ground to bring its invasion beam into play. Ghoulish Viridian lights flickered over the battlefield as the teleport beam activated, delivering doomsday arcs, legions of Necron immortals, as well as the Lord and his personal Lich Guard into the thick of battle. Those Space Marines that yet survived now withdrew to the planetary governor's citadel. 3 doomsday arcs converged their fire to the great adamantium gate. For a handful of moments, it glowed an angry red, then burst into fragments with an ear-splitting crack. As the Imperial Fist fell back deeper into the citadel, the Lord raised his war scythes in salute to the doomed foes. Then the scythe went down, and the Nemesor led his triumphant army of the Undying through the ruined gates. Shortly thereafter, Fort Ann had fallen. The rest of Ut Prime would soon follow, and another world would be added to the territory of Gidrim and the growing personal domain of Nemesor Zandrak. The Space Marines would continue their struggle against the Necrons, this time in the Orpheus sector, in the edge of the Segmentum Tempestus, when the Minarch dynasty reached its intended strength, attacking the Imperial sector. The attack was preceded by a communication blackout, which left the Orpheus sector cut in two. The Necrons advanced in two distinct lines of battle, one invading the sector from the outer darkness, with a second line entering the sector from the galactic south and the territories of their former Layak sector. Unable to call for help, the entire eastern half of the Orpheus sector succumbed quickly, with only the Space Marines of the Angels Revenant chapter putting up a true fight. But even their sacrifice was not enough to stop the Xeno advance. 100 solar days after the Minarch offensive began, the silence was broken, and a tide of atmospheric warnings and distress signals reached the Orpheus sector's capital world of Amara Prime. Only now realizing that it had come under attack, the Imperium mobilized its vast armies. Unfortunately, it could not prevent the Drusilian subsector from being overrun. Led by their greatest nemesis, Macklin Kutlak, the Necrons inexplicably stopped their advance after 100 solar days. As tradition demanded it, their enemy would be given 2 cycles of the ancient Necrontyr moon to prepare themselves to meet their death. The Orpheus sector's Imperial governor, Calibor Lan, used this time to turn his world, Amara Prime, into a fortress, stripping other worlds of their defenses and transferring them to Amara. Crusading forces and reinforcements allotted to the purge of the chaos-ridden Chimerium system were rerouted to Amara, including the armies drawn from the Necromundan regiments and the fearsome death corps of Krieg of the Imperial Guard. Most importantly, perhaps, the entire Space Marine chapter, the Minotaurs, under their chapter master, Asterion Moloch, joined the defenders of Amara. And yet, this stronghold of Imperial might was laid low in a single solar day, when the Necrons almost entirely destroyed the powerful battle fleet defending Amara, and landed their troops unopposed on the surface. Had it not been for the desperate counterattack of the Minotaur's chapter fleet, and the stoic resistance of the Death Corps, total victory would have been achieved. Yet through great sacrifice and bloody determination, Moloch faced Kutlak on the bridge of his tomb ship, Dead Hand. The Minotaur's chapter master and his elite First Company veterans succeeded in wounding Kutlak before being sucked into the void. Having not anticipated this level of stubbornness amongst their foes, the Necrons retreated with something akin to respect for the vermin which had settled upon their world. For the Imperium, however, the losses of the Battle of Amara proved so severe that the sector had to be abandoned and officially dissolved as a Sector Imperialis. The fighting continued, however, as the Undying Legions progressed to the Galactic West, and the Imperium tried to salvage what it could from the remains of the Orpheus sector. The Space Marines would get their revenge on the Necrons on the mining world of Damnos in the Ultima Segmentum. A Necron tomb world was discovered on the city of Mandos Prime when a fusion station was under repair following severe seismic activity. The Adeptus Mechanicus tech priests rapidly claimed their rights to the Xeno artifacts and extradited several specimens to the nearby Forge world. Soon after, under a wave of atmospheric interference that clouded the entire northern hemisphere of the planet, the Necrons emerged from their tombs. The planet went on alert, but the threat was incomprehensible. No warning had been received from the fallen hive cities, and any reconnaissance units deployed never returned. As more hive cities toppled to the unknown invaders, word of the assault finally got through to the planetary governor, who deployed every regiment under his command. Within 6 solar months, almost all of Damnos Manufactorum hive cities were in ruin, and the planetary capital of Kellenport finally fell to the Necron forces. The second company of the Ultramarines answered the planet's distress call. The strike cruiser, Valen's Revenge, arrived just as the final Necron assault on the world's capital city of Kellenport began. Aboard was Captain Cato Sicarius, who ordered the cruiser to move into low orbit above Kellenport to begin the ground assault. The second company launched in 3 groups of drop pods. The first, with Captain Sicarius, struck the Necron forces in the very heart of their siege lines, scouring the machine warriors from the capital city's outer walls. The second group of the Ultramarines, under the command of Chief Librarian Varro Tigurius, hit home amidst the Necron Gauss cannons and Gauss pylons, whose fire was raining down upon the remaining Imperial defenders of the capital. And the third wave of Ultramarines, consisting entirely of unmanned Deathwing drop pods, slammed into the broken rubble outside the besieged capital, firing waves of missiles into the Necron flanks. The first strike force advanced against the Necron command node. Their target was the Necron Lord commanding the assault. Captain Sicarius assaulted his position with his most experienced battle brothers, and the dreadnought Agrippan. Sicarius was badly wounded in the assault, and for a moment it looked like the Necrons would earn the victory. But the dreadnought attacked the Necron Lord, and with a single blow he destroyed the nefarious enemy commander. With their leader, the only true sentient Necron, destroyed, the Necrons reverted to their secondary command protocols and began to retreat. Captain Sicarius was taken to the strike cruiser's medical bay, and Tigurius took command over the remaining Ultramarines. Later, Tigurius and Agrippan were forced to acknowledge that Damnos was lost to the enemy. They initiated an evacuation of as many of the planet's inhabitants as possible. When the new Necron assault began, most of the planet's inhabitants were already gone, and only the Ultramarines and the Kellen port-based regiments of the Astra Militarum were still on the ground. The Ultramarines defended the city valiantly, slowly falling back to the spaceport as the last Thunderhawk gunship landed to evacuate the survivors. Only 40 Space Marines and 20 Guardsmen were still alive. In the final moments of the battle, the dreadnought Agrippan fell, pinned down between a dozen streams of Gauss cannon fire. As the Thunderhawks sped Tigurius and the last of the Imperial defenders to the safety of Valen's Revenge, Agrippan's internal plasma reactor went critical, and the resulting explosion destroyed Damnos' capital city and every Necron within it. Later, Damnos was bombarded by the vessels of the Imperial Navy from orbit, destroying the planet's surface and ending the Necron threat on Damnos, at least as far as the Imperium was aware. Since Sicarius and his men were able to evacuate large swaths of the world's population from certain death, the mission was not a complete failure. However, the Ultramarines failed in their primary objective of destroying the Necron threat that had emerged on Damnos. Sicarius was determined not to let such a slight go unanswered for so long. For the first time, he had tasted bitter defeat in battle, and it was a black mark that would twist within his heart for the next 25 standard years. In future battles, the violent displays of courage became reckless to the point of unnecessarily endangering the lives of his men, and every victory after Damnos rang hollow to him. Despite the Inquisition's effort to suppress all knowledge of the Necron's reemergence into the galaxy, the Imperium's faith in its military supremacy was shaken by the news that spread across the galaxy, and that the Xenos had overcome both the Imperial Guard and the Ultramarines at Damnos. Eventually, reports of the loss of Damnos made their way to Terra, where both the Fabricator General of the Adeptus Mechanicus and the High Lords of Terra decreed that the Ultramarines must return to Damnos and eradicate the Necron threat once and for all. 25 standard years after the Damnos incident, this Imperial order was brought to Macragge by the experienced Deathwatch strike team led by Squad Lazarius. Chapter Master Marnius Calgar was not pleased with the Imperial decree, for he knew that the Second Company had faced only a fraction of the awakened Necrons on Damnos, a quarter of a Terran century before. Once they returned to Damnos, the Ultramarines would face the entire strength of a Necron tomb world, and risk the deaths of hundreds of the chapter's Astartes. The journey to Damnos was a perilous one, with Calgar relying on various ruses and distractions to get his warriors safely to the planet's surface. By the time the Necrons had spotted the true location of the Ultramarines' warship, the Astartes fleet was in position to launch their drop pods. The first wave consisted of unmanned variant designs to draw the fire of the Gauss pylon. The second wave, however, represented the true assault, which brought hundreds of Space Marines, as well as a number of vengeful Imperial Guard regiments, to the heart of the Necron's subterranean tomb complexes. Their objective was to destroy the pyramid complex that controlled the Necron's power grid, and to do it before the Imperial forces were overwhelmed. However, one factor that they did not account for was the physical incarnation of the Catan held within the Tesseract Vault. It was determined that this vault was the true source of the Necron's power, and must be neutralized if the Imperial forces were to have any hope of victory. Despite the power brought to bear by the Imperial assault on Damnos, Marnius Calgar felt like a duelist being taken apart by a superior foe in the battle cage. The Xenos' battle logic proved impeccable, with its master intelligence anticipating the Ultramarines' every move and neutralizing each tactic they employed. Thanks to an energy shield emitted from the vault, every plasma volley and meltablast employed against the Necron monoliths dissipated harmlessly or detonated prematurely before it could harm the construct. Since the Xenos had managed to analyze the Ultramarines' battle doctrines, Calgar realized he must attempt a completely unexpected stratagem. Assaulting the ranks of the Necron Immortals, the Chapter Master jumped onto the metallic base of the malfunctioning Gauss pylon and slowly pushed the war engine's crest back until the Viridian beam hit the energy shield of the floating necropolis. With a blinding flash of light, the energy shield protecting the tomb complex collapsed, and the Tesseract vault was broken wide open to reveal the enraged demigod imprisoned within. A giant cruciform of pure light rose above the Necron army, the remnants of the C'tan's energy cage still crackling around it, roaring in joy at its newfound freedom. The booming sound threw Ultramarines and Necrons alike to the icy ground and cracked the planet's crust. Its first victim would be the Necron Overlord, the Undying, which the Star God crushed with ease by transforming the Earth around his metallic form into an oversized fist. The Overlord phased out of reality, seeking to escape back to his subterranean lair, but deep underground, the surviving members of Death Watch Squad, Lazarius, had reached their own objective. The Undying had teleported back to his cable sarcophagus, right in front of the Death Watch's eyes. Unfortunately for the Necron, the crack team of Astartes had replaced the engines with melta-charges and destabilizers, and proceeded to blast the Necron Overlord into atoms. Back on the surface, the Xenos reeled from the loss of their leader, the artificially intelligent command program that governed their warriors' every action. Meanwhile, the Unleashed C'tan lashed out in fury at both the Necron enslavers and the Ultramarines as Captain Sicarius dueled the Flayed One Lord. After ramming his power sword into the powerful Flayed One's torso, Sicarius summoned 25 Terran years of anger and frustration into the final burst of strength. He unclipped the vortex grenade that had been given to him earlier and activated its weapon before throwing it at the enraged demigod hovering overhead. The grenade detonated and formed a spiraling orb of nothingness as its unstoppable force sucked the C'tan into the warp before collapsing and winking out of existence. Sicarius felt a great weight lift in that moment as he realized both he and the Ultramarines had been redeemed for their original failure on Damnos in the sight of the Emperor. Over the next few solar days, the Imperials eliminated the surviving Necrons with grim efficiency. Empty tomb complexes were collapsed or detonated under the guidance of the Death Watch, and the citizens of Damnos, whom Sicarius had rescued solar decades before, were restored to the world to reclaim it for their own. Within the Space Wolf's mighty citadel, known as the Fang, is the Hall of Heroes. Here statues and trophies and relics honor the triumphs of the greatest champions of the Space Wolves chapter. Here are commemorated those great warriors whose sagas stand as record for the Space Wolves' most glorious deeds. Even amongst these legends, Cairo Grimblood holds a place of honor, for it was he and his great company that saved Fenris at the time of ultimate peril. Cairo Grimblood had come to command a great company of Space Wolves at a time when the Imperium of Man was weak and all hope was drained from the great masses of humanity. It seemed that the Emperor had forsaken mankind, but nobody knew that the Emperor was fighting his own deadly battle within the warp, and that the very existence of humanity hung by a thread. During the long, dark age of apostasy of the 36th millennium, several decades after the death of the infamous High Lord Goj Vandire, many false prophets appeared throughout this archaic age, some little more than madmen, leading rebel bands, other spiritual demagogues who commanded whole worlds and armies. The most powerful of these was the apostate cardinal of Galthamor, Bucharest, whose heresies reached such proportions it became known as the Plague of Unbelief. The cardinal world of Galthamor was not a rich diocese, but Bucharest, driven by jealousy of his peers' achievements, vowed to build one of the largest temples to the Emperor's glory on his own cardinal world. After brutally enslaving the population of Galthamor, Bucharest still needed more men and resources. Using an army of thugs and cutthroats, he conquered the nearby world of Randa. With access to the richer mines of the world, Bucharest's wealth grew. It was also here, in the Randa system, that Bucharest joined forces with the renegade Imperial Navy Admiral Shehala and the Colonel Gaston of the 25th Regilian Imperial Guard Regiment. With these forces at his disposal, Bucharest was able to carve out a small stellar empire to the galactic quest of Terra, and within the next 7 standard years, 50 star systems had fallen under his control. Isolated from Terra by a great concentration of warp storms, Bucharest preached that Terra had fallen to the enemies of the Emperor, and set about establishing himself as the head of the ecclesiarchy. Having no contact with the Imperium, the people of the region had no way of knowing the truth, and soon the armies of Bucharest were advancing on nearby star systems, imposing their cruel regimes on every world they conquered. Bucharest preached a particular strain of the Imperial Creed, which held that salvation was only to be found through personal strength and the casting out of the weak. Only through advancing his own interest at the expense of others could a man attain divinity? Bucharest preached a doctrine that ran counter to the Imperial Creed's assertion that only through sacrifice for the good of humanity would deliverance at the hands of the God Emperor be granted. Armies fought for him. Sick and depraved individuals gathered underneath his dark banner. Xenos flocked to his court, and the Chaos Gods worked their evil under his protection. His armies of fanatical devotees marched across the galaxy, conquering all before them, subjugating one world after another, and growing stronger with every fresh conquest. In a single bold sweep, the forces of Bucharest leapt from the distant galaxy's east to the very heart of the Imperium. The armies of Bucharest continued to conquer world after world, and only when their conquest infringed upon the Space Wolves chapter of the Adeptus Astartes did events turn against them. During this time of great upheaval, the Space Wolves kept themselves distant from the infighting and the treachery infecting the Imperium, preferring instead to defend the system around their homeworld. But Bucharest's encroachment into the system around Fenris was all the cause the Space Wolves needed, and soon full-scale war erupted between the Space Wolves and the forces of the renegade Cardinal. A massive invasion fleet soon arrived within range of Fenris, and a fierce space battle broke out. Though the Space Wolves' small picket fleet was grievously outnumbered, they succeeded in crippling many of the renegade vessels before escaping, beginning a hit-and-run campaign against Bucharest's rebel fleet that would last for many standard years. Braving the punishing fire from the Fang's many defense lasers, thousands of troop transports descended on Fenris. Though many were reduced to flaming wreckages, others arrived intact and disgorged troops and vehicles onto the continent of Azaheim. Bucharest's forces cut a bloody swath across Azaheim, dogged at every turn by the vicious Fenrisian weather, the scout parties of the Space Wolves, and even the indigenous human population of Fenris. Whole communities were butchered as Bucharest's savage army approached the Fang. Villages were razed to the ground, and thousands were enslaved. Soon the Fang was surrounded by a sea of traitorous soldiers that stretched off into the horizon. But for all their numbers and brutality, the forces of the apostate Cardinal were a small match for the kindled fury of the Space Wolves. Enraged at the treatment of their fellow Fenrisians and the temerity of these renegades at invading their realm, they struck back with all the savagery they could muster. Wolf Scouts severed lines of communication, assassinated leaders with pinpoint attacks, exploded munition caches, and sowed discord amongst the foe. Blood claws emerged from hidden passageways beneath the Fang, hurling themselves at the traitors in gore-soaked frenzy. Longfangs executed careful ambushes, eliminating armored convoys with heavy weapons fire, and collapsing mountainous valleys onto mile-long convoys of vehicles and enemy reinforcements. For 3 standard years, the fanatical armies of Bucharest pounded upon the gates of the Fang. The apostate Cardinal threw his best warriors against the mighty citadel, promising them wealth and glory beyond measure, should they be victorious. For 3 standard years, the Space Wolves held them at bay, inflicting monstrous casualties every time they repelled an assault. Attack after attack, bombardment after bombardment, fell against the walls and the gates of the Fang, and yet the citadel remained unbreached. Bucharest drew in more and more soldiers, though even his forces on distant Galthamor were a quarter of their normal strength. Believing his property secure, he mustered his armies for one last assault to sweep all resistance before him. Millions died as the native Fenrisians fought a protracted guerrilla war against the invaders. Though they tried many times to penetrate the attackers' line, the Space Wolves were unable to do anything to break the siege. Fate intervened once more, but this time to deal a cruel blow to Bucharest's plan, for the salvation of Fenris had come in the form of the Wolf Lord, Cairo Grimblood. Grimblood's great company had departed from Fenris 5 Terran years before, returning from a great hunt within the Eye of Terror. Now he had returned just in time, as the besieging forces gathered for the final attack. Out beyond the furthest planet in the system, reality tore itself apart as the Space Wolves' warfleet emerged from the warp. As Bucharest's own vessels investigated, they were confronted by an armada of Space Wolves' battle barges, returning to their home planet. The Space Wolves lost no time in attacking, smashing nearly half of Bucharest's renegade fleet in their first strike. Caught between the newcomers and the attack of the remaining Space Wolves' vessels from the center of the star system, the Admiral ordered a withdrawal and fled the system, leaving the renegade soldiers on Fenris to meet their fate. The counterattack of Cairo Grimblood's great company smashed into the enemy's flanks, killing tens of thousands of traitor guardsmen and scattering thousands of their numbers into the forbidden forests of the continent of Azaheim. Driven by hunger, ravenous packs of Fenrisian wolves fell upon the fleeing heretics and consumed them. Drop pods disgorged grey hunter packs into the heart of the enemy, while Thunderhawk gunships deployed predators and land raiders into dominating positions. Grimblood himself plunged into battle alongside the warriors of his elite bodyguards, the Oath Brothers, more than 50 Wolfguard veterans in Terminator armor, who tore the heart out of the traitor's command structure. The besieged Space Wolves finally broke out to seal the fate of the traitors, and the battle was won. Retreating and leaderless, the Renegade's fate was sealed. Of those few that escaped the wrath of the enraged Space Wolves, none survived the giant Fenrisian wolf packs or vicious climate of Azaheim. The apostate Cardinal managed to escape on a shuttle to link up with his admiral, who dropped back out of the warp to briefly rendezvous with his fellow conqueror. Leaving Fenrisian to the Space Wolves, Bucharest pulled back his northern forces and consolidated his hold on the rest of his domain. Grimblood had not only saved Fenris, but possibly Terra itself. By depleting the apostate Cardinal's forces, Grimblood granted the chance for Confessor Dolan Kyorosis to successfully investigate and lead his revolt against the corrupted madman. From that point on, star system after star system defied Bucharest, the faithful rising up to resist his forces by whatever means possible, even when they were slaughtered in their attempt. It was not yet the end of Bucharest, whose armies were as numerous as the stars, but it represented the turning point in the war against the apostate Cardinal, and the end of the plague of unbelief. The victory of Cairo Grimblood was heralded as the rebirth of a unified and powerful Imperium. The big guns boomed out with an earth-shattering roar, and their deadly cargo screamed overhead. Boss Grabnats squinted over the shattered wall at the Space Marines deploying at the bottom of the hill. They were unfolding into neat ranks like a well-oiled machine, apparently oblivious to the explosions and the shrapnel scything past. He hawked and spat a huge glob of green phlegm over the wall. There were loads of them, almost as many of them as there were orcs in the ruins. He ducked back down and looked over his own boys. After months of fighting, the survivors were getting bigger and tougher, their green hides thicker and gnarled, just like proper orcs. They were all excitedly slapping magazines into their shooters, cracking knuckles, sharpening fangs and blades, and bragging about how many Marine boys they were going to kill. Grabnats decided that he would have to keep an eye on young Scabsnick. The extra slab of muscle he was growing, and the look of his eye, showed he had started to get ideas of being a boss. He'd need to be taught a lesson pretty soon. Time for that later, he thought, as he cursed them all roundly for being slackers and kicked them into a fighting line. No more than 2 or 3 to each gap in the wall. The last boys were just in place as Space Marine bolter fire started blasting lumps out of the wall. Grubnax bound to his feet and started blazing away. The boys followed suit. Up and down the ruins he could hear the shout and other mobs firing. The noise alone was incredible. It pounded at his ears like a tribe of insane drummers. Great daggers of flames stabbed out from the shooters, and hot shell casings spewed everywhere. The resulting storm of fire whipped across the armored ranks, and sparks flew as shots ricocheted off the Space Marine's armor. Some of them fell, but the line kept stubbornly advancing. There was a flash and a roar a split second before the boss found himself hurled to the ground. A series of explosions followed. Rubble and dust flew from the walls with each concussion. Smoke and flames were snaking through the ruins as the boys clambered to their feet. Several were wounded, and some didn't get back up at all, even when they were kicked. Scabsnick was unconscious enough to stand up right next to a gap in the wall, and was blown to bits by bolter fire. The boss felt vaguely disappointed that he wouldn't get to fight Scabsnick, now that the stupid Zogger had gotten himself killed. The Space Marines must be getting close now, he thought. Time to back off to the courtyard. He led the dazed remnants of his mob in a crouching run back to the hollowed shell of a building on the other side of the courtyard. Shots snarled and roared over his head as they ran, but nobody was hit. There the big guns were being readied for another shot. Slavers cracked their whips, eliciting the shrieks of pain from the grots struggling to push the guns into position and lug more ammo forward. The boss took his boys to join up with the remnants of Ruzgob's mob. Ruzgob and his boys mocked them as they came up, but it put more heart back into the boys as they mocked back. Got chewed up and spat out. Ruzgob shouted. "Didn't see you up there, worm food," responded the boss. "You was too busy running like a runt," Ruzgob added, emphasizing by kicking his ammo runt a good 3 meters. It was an impressive kick, but the boss wasn't about to concede that. At that point, armored figures pushed through the gaps in the outer wall, and further exchanges of wit were cut short by the big guns going off again with a crash that sounded like the end of the world. The carnage was impressive. What was left of the wall was painted with bright red blood, and armored bodies were piled high around it. Ruzgob and Grubnats led their boys into the open and charged forward, howling and losing off shots as they ran. The surviving Space Marines didn't run for it or even back away, though the boss had fought Space Marines before, so he didn't really expect them to. Instead, they leveled their bolter and started firing. Boys were blown apart left, right, and center, but they kept going. The boss's boys weren't going to be outdone by Ruzgob's scum. They were about to barrel into the Space Marines when a huge chunk of the wall tumbled inward, and a massive, armored shape of a dreadnought lurched through the gap with a cannon blazing at the charging mob. Without pause, the dreadnought plowed into Ruzgob's mob like a juggernaut and almost disappeared as the orcs hurled themselves at it. The Space Marines charged to protect their dreadnought, and in an instant, the whole courtyard had dissolved into a sprawling hand-to-hand combat. This was the time all orcs lived for, the roaring, blood-pumping, heart-racing mayhem of face-to-face fighting. The boss brought his chopper down on the helm of the first Space Marine he reached, but it glanced off the shoulder plate. The Space Marine raised the bolter pistol and blew a chunk of the boss's shoulder, which stung like crazy and made him really mad. The boss struck back with a roar, hitting at the joints in the Space Marine's armor, his elbows, knees, and neck, places where he was vulnerable. In a few quick chops, the Space Marine was face down in the mud, and the boss was blasting his slugger into the back of another one his boys were having trouble with. Ricochets flew wildly, but one shot hit something vital in the Space Marine, and he crumbled. The boss's arm was starting to stiffen up now from the wound, but his blood sang with the joy of violence, too much to take notice. He blazed away with his slugger, reveling in the solid kick of it each time it fired. When it was empty, he threw it at the dreadnought, which was busy ripping off the last of Ruzgob's boys. He roared with laughter and swung his chopper to split the skull of a Space Marine who was trying to get to his feet. This was the life, the boss thought. Conflict between Space Marines and craft-world Eldar can be traced as far back as the Great Crusade, most notably the meeting between Fulgrim, Primarch of the Emperor's Children Legion, and the Eldar Farseer, Eldred Ulthran, upon the Eldar maiden world of Tarsis. Both leaders had come in peace to discuss the Imperial compliance of the planet, and Fulgrim's willingness to ignore Imperial doctrines on the matter, and to leave the Eldar maiden world unconquered by the Imperium. But the main issue that Eldred was attempting to pursue was that the Imperial War Master Horus had turned to chaos, and sought to betray the Emperor of Mankind. However, Eldred was unaware that Fulgrim had already been corrupted by contact with a Slaaneshi demon blade that had been recovered from the world of Loran. The supposedly peaceful meeting soon turned into a bloody battle when Ulthran sensed that the Emperor's children had already been corrupted by She Who Thirsts. Being that Fulgrim was unaware of the existence of the chaotic taint within himself or his Astartes, or even what chaos was at the time, the Ulthway Eldar's actions were seen as a betrayal and great insult to the offer of friendship and peace that Fulgrim had offered them with the Imperium of Man. Henceforth, mankind and Eldar have been at nearly open war since the days of the Horus Heresy. Decades after the colonization of Baran, the Eldar of Bael'tan arrived to find their original Exodite colony completely wiped out by orcs, and their world infested with greenskins and humans. Filled with a burning desire for vengeance, the Fire Dragon Exarch, Marion, led a campaign against the feral orcs of Baran, driving them from ancient Eldar sites deep in the forests. Unable to face the Eldar in battle, the orcs began a mass exodus from the forests that brought them into furious conflicts with the human Baran siege masters and their fortress cities. As the colony cities came under even more intense assault, The defenders realized their position was ultimately hopeless if they did not receive support. The planetary governor Asabera dispatched what reserves he had from his capital city of Endera to the most isolated colonies, but he quickly realized that this was only a delaying measure at best. He had no option but to call upon the Raven Guard on their moon of Coron for aid. Shadow Captain Moradius chose not to deploy to the embattled fortress city, as his forces were too few to effectively aid in the defense of so many isolated sieges. Captain Moradius was more concerned with what was driving the orcs from the forest than he was with the actual feral orcs. Determined to discover the cause of the orc attacks, the Raven Guard returned to Baran, making only brief contact with the governor before they struck out to the deepest, wildest sections of Baran's forests. As they searched the forest for signs of orcs, the Raven Guard discovered every greenskin settlement completely destroyed, every lair rooted out, and there was barely any orcs remaining to be found. Something had destroyed the orcs' camps and driven them from the forests. Captain Moradius knew that such spontaneous, yet orchestrated activity across the entire planet was not likely to have been the result of the orcs' own infighting. With little else to discover in the forests, Moradius recalled his scout teams and took his warriors into the Vultus Plains, a barren region of the steppe plains where even the orcs did not establish settlements, choosing instead to roam the plains riding giant boars, squigots, and other creatures as warring nomadic tribes. After a week of hard marching across the plains, the Raven Guard at last encountered the orcs, but Captain Moradius was not seeking to drive yet more orcs towards the fortress city, and so broke off contact after a brief skirmish. After withdrawing from combat with the nomadic greenskins, Moradius ordered his scout marines to shadow the orcs and watch for signs of the force that had driven the orcs from the forests. Days later, the scouts reported back that the greenskins were under attack. Without delay, the Raven Guard rushed to the orcs' tribe's location aboard 6 Thunderhawk gunships. Despite their haste, the orcs were completely wiped out by the time they arrived. The Raven Guard instead came face to face with the Eldar of Bael'tan. Well versed in the slippery nature of the Eldar, Moradius ordered the immediate assault, striking the Eldar forces rapidly and reaping a heavy toll in Xeno lives. The Eldar had apparently not planned on engaging the local Imperial forces so soon, and certainly had not counted on the presence of Space Marines. For hours, the Astartes and Eldar fought running battles as the Space Marines slowly began to outnumber the Xeno forces, striking at them from all sides until the Xenos at last fell back to a circle of standing stones, ancient monuments of the days of the Eldar Empire's rule over Baran. Resolving to crush the Eldar army decisively, the Raven Guard committed to the attack, but this was what the Eldar had wanted. As the Astartes closed in on the remaining Eldar forces, webway gates opened up all around the ring of the standing stones. The Raven Guard force found itself encircled by the entire Eldar sword wing that had been rampaging across the surface of Baran. Though they fought bravely, the Space Marines held out for only a few hours before they were utterly exterminated. The Eldar managed to open an ancient webway gate on Baran's plain, from which the Eldar Titans could emerge to join the battle. The defenders of Baran were swept from the world, which was reclaimed by the Eldar, though the Imperium and the Raven Guard vowed to retake it. Many years later, the Space Marines would get a chance at vengeance against the Bael'tan craft world, when an emissary was sent to the Imperial world of Comrath to enter negotiations with its planetary governor for the return of an ancient, eldritch artifact from the tomb of one of the Ultramarine's most lauded heroes, Captain Orar. This artifact was known as the Scepter of Calixian. When the Imperial noble refused his request, the Eldar emissary grew angry, and soon his pleas turned to threats of violence. The planetary governor refused to be cowed by the arrogance of Xenos, and had the Eldar executed on the spot. However, the governor had foresight to heed the Eldar's threats and request aid from the Ultramarines. Eldar from the Alatok and Yanden craft world then proceeded to assault the planet of Comrath to recover the Eldar artifact within Orar's Sepulcher. Orar was a great Ultramarine hero in the aftermath of the Horus Heresy, and the chapter master, Marnius Calgar, vowed not a single alien would breach the sanctity of his tomb. For the first time since the Battle of Macragge, Calgar led his entire chapter to war. The Eldar descended upon the Sepulcher to find it held against them by the Ultramarines. Eldar aspect warriors and guardians darted towards the main gates of the great edifice that was Orar's tomb, as as grav tanks and artillery engines battered the Imperial defenders. On Calgar's command, the Ultramarines emerged from cover and scoured the invaders from the Sepulcher steppes with disciplined bolter volleys. The Eldar fell back, only to find their lines of retreat cut off by assault marines and land speeders. Eldar leaders emerged from cover and rallied the trapped first wave, only to fall to sniper fire as the Ultramarine scouts made their presence known. And although the initial Eldar assault failed, for an entire day and night, they continued to attack. Though they mustered every arcane science at their command, they could not overcome the tactical brilliance of Marneus Calgar and his Ultramarines. The following day, a fresh assault swept onto the great stairs of the Sepulcher, led by a colossal figure wreathed in flame, an avatar of Cain, the Eldar god of war. Heavy weapons fire seemed only to anger the creature, and the Ultramarines' battle line buckled beneath its onslaught. So Calgar had no choice but to issue a challenge himself. The fiery god bellowed with fury, its first blow missing the Ultramarines' chapter master by a hair's breadth. The second tore plates from Calgar's armor. A third bit deep into his shoulder, driving the chapter master to one knee. But the fourth slammed into the armored palm of Calgar's left hand. Rising up, Calgar struck with all his strength, bringing his other gauntlet around in a mighty arc that punched clean through the molten ichor of the Avatar's torso. With the fall of their war god, the Eldar lost all heart and retreated. Some fled without heed, while others fell back in good order. But all the Xenos retreated into the darkness. Despite overwhelming odds, once again the Ultramarines had emerged victorious. But in his wisdom, Calgar knew that the Eldar would return for the scepter of Galixian. So it was that Calgar informed Comrade's governor that the Galixian scepter would be removed from Aura's Sepulcher to Macragge, where it could be properly defended. Many years later, the Eldar would feel the fury of another Space Marine chapter, as Captain Macharian was charged by Commander Dante of the Blood Angels with the destruction of the Eldari raiders who were assaulting Imperial commerce from a fortress making use of Eldari anti-gravitic technology hidden in the toxic atmosphere of the gas giant called Melioneth. Making use of the chapter's entire existing fleet of Storm Ravens and Thunderhawk gunships, Macharian launched an airborne assault that had no equal in the chapter's long history. Storm Ravens cut through the blades of anti-aircraft fire to disgorge their cargoes of assault squads and Terminators directly onto the floating fortress docking platforms. These Astartes secured the landing zone for heavily armored vehicles like Land Raiders and Predators, which were delivered by a full-on wave of Thunderhawk transports. As the battle then unfolded through the Eldar fortress hangars and maintenance shafts, the overwhelming firepower brought to bear by the Blood Angels was able to sight through the arcane traps and dishonorable defense systems erected by the Eldar Corsairs. Once they realized that they had no chance to stop the human assault, the Xenos abandoned the fortress, although not before sabotaging its gravitic nullification technology. The Blood Angels were forced to retreat as the fortress was sucked down into the gas giant's grasping depths. Only the incredible skill displayed by the Blood Angels' gunship pilots, who fearlessly plunged into the depths of Melioneth's gravity well to rescue their battle brothers, prevented what became a famous victory for the chapter from ending in a monumental failure. The Blood Angels would once again find themselves at odds against the Eldar during the vaults of Pandrax, when in search for a cure for the Blood Angel's genetic flaw, Brother Corbulo discovers a repository of archaeal tech from the Dark Age of technology on the world of Pandrax III. Unfortunately, this is controlled by Craftworld Alitoke. 3 whole companies of Blood Angels, including the Terminators of the first company, were assigned to seize the vaults from the Xeno interlopers. A fierce battle erupts through the tech vaults and catacombs of Pandrax III. Although the Blood Angels were the ultimate victors, the Farseer commanding the Alitoke Eldar sacrificed himself to destroy the very records of advanced genetic manipulation techniques that Corbulo had sought. The search for the cure of the Blood Angel's flaw continued. The suppression of the Macharian Heresy was a notable Imperial military campaign conducted by the notoriously savage Minotaur Space Marine chapter, following the death of Lord Commander Solar Macarius. After the death of Macarius, those great domains he had conquered for the Imperium of Man during the Macharian Crusade fell into open civil war and anarchy between his 7 former Imperial Guard Army Group generals throughout the newly conquered territory. These contested territories splintered into petty star empires, each lorded over by one of Macarius's old generals, who had repudiated their oaths of loyalty to the Imperium. Opposing each other, as well as the authority of the Adeptus Terra, in and with Space Marine chapters now dragging sword upon each other in dispute and anger, the High Lords of Terra were forced to act decisively. This they did by calling in several waves of fresh Space Marine chapters to bring the civil conflict to an end by exterminating heretical forces and bringing order to the region under the command of the Imperial War Master, Solon. Ultimately, the forces of over 100 separate chapters were deployed at some point during the campaign. One such chapter, operating under the High Lord's right, were the Minotaurs. Then a chapter all but unseen for millennia. They were a chapter both familiar through their fell reputation and profoundly changed. A fleet-based chapter operating fully equipped and at peak strength. The Minotaurs fought as a single, cohesive force that struck like a series of brutal axe blows at sources of schisms and disorders, quickly earning themselves a bloody reputation by carrying out the orders of the High Lords without question or falter. During the suppression, it was the Minotaurs who formed the spearhead of the battle group which shattered the petty empire of the outlaw Colonel Lyris of the 11th Kadu Armored Corps, their chapter's land raiders blasting apart the famed tanks of the elite Cadusian immortals on the ice planet of Gyros Prime. They also carried out exterminatus orders on the hive world of Duval and the sword realms of the Hope Cluster, while on the ocean world of Nereus, they hunted down and obliterated the Xenos-possessed remnants of the Imperial Paladins Chapter's 4th Company in a maze of subsurface cavern cities, poisoning the seas of the once vital agri-world. The action from which the Minotaurs gained the most infamy during the Macharian Heresy would be known as the Euxine Incident, which resulted in the near destruction of 2 Imperial Space Marine chapters who had become locked in conflict. These chapters were the Doom Warriors and the Inceptors. Formerly allies in the Macharian Crusade, they had come to blows over a matter of honor and were embroiled in a long-running and highly protracted conflict fought under determined rules of engagements in the Euxine system. With the 2 combatant chapters refusing calls to end this battle and aid to the pacification, the Minotaurs were dispatched to sunder the 2 apart and end the strife. Caring nothing for the cause or rights of the 2 chapters, the Minotaurs attacked in full force with their initial strike. Overmatched and broken, the Doom Warriors fled the system almost immediately in a barely organized retreat. However, with most of their warships either destroyed or captured in orbit, the Inceptors found themselves trapped in the Euxine system. Relentlessly and systematically, the honored second founding chapter were encircled and slowly destroyed piece by piece until the last remaining Inceptor Space Marines were forced into a humiliating surrender, as fewer than 100 Battle Brothers had survived. To add further insult to this defeat, the Minotaurs stripped the fallen of many relics of their own armories and took the ravaged chapter's flagship, a great Crusade-era assault transport that had served the Inceptors since their founding. That such an ancient and revered chapter and close scion of the Ultramarines could be almost annihilated in this fashion, and with the agreement of the High Lords, sent shockwaves throughout many of the Space Marine chapters who have heard it. The Minotaurs were denounced across Ultramar for their atrocities and forbidden to enter its bounds. Other of Guilliman's line have since sworn vengeance on the chapter, should the opportunity arise, and honor permit they carry it out. The Minotaurs were not the only chapter to fight other Space Marine chapters. After the death of Lord Commander Solar Macarius, the Star Phantoms became swiftly embroiled in the Macharian Heresy, as they clashed directly with those Imperial Guard forces who, in their chapter's view, had betrayed the Imperium. The Star Phantoms were listed in certain suppressed sources as being directly responsible for the annihilation of the 17th Terex Guard on Thought, and are known to have engaged in a bloody and protracted conflict with their former allies, the Marines Malevolence. The Star Phantoms chapter became subject of inquisitorial investigation as a result of almost destroying the entire Marines Malevolent chapter, and were ultimately cleansed of heresy, but received censure from the Ordo Hereticus. Even the first founding chapters, legendary and revered as they were, fought amongst each other. The Dark Angels were one of the Space Marine chapters tasked with the suppression of the Civil War. The Ravenwing uncovered several corrupt Chaos cults during the campaign, largely instigated by the Alpha Legion and the unmistakable signs of the fallen angel Cypher's presence. But during the uprising, only a run-in with the Space Wolves, the Dark Angel's ancient rivals, allowed several of the fallen to escape the Dark Angel's grasp. All in all, the suppression of the Macharian Heresy would take several standard years before order was restored, under the command of War Master Solon, to the affected regions of the Segmentum Pacificus. And those were 40 facts on Space Marine battles. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, share it with your friends and thank our patrons on Patreon. It is because of them that we can do this. Link in the description if you guys want to support us. But with that said, I'll talk to you tomorrow. This was Gersh1 with One Mind Syndicate signing out.